So, hi everyone. My name is Maya Mao, and this is my YouTube channel, Plotting and Scheming. And my guest today is Louisa Onomé. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
Onomé.
Onomé. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Louisa is the author of Like Home, which recently came out last month, and I'll let Louisa tell you a little bit about the book and a little bit more about herself as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Louisa, and I wrote the young adult contemporary novel Like Home, which did come out last month. And Like Home is a story about a 16-year-old girl who is really just trying to deal with changes in her neighborhood. Yeah, like I think a lot of it encompasses change, like changes in her neighborhood and also changes with her friendships, with other relationships, and just really trying to come to terms with what change means for her.
That's awesome. I am really, really excited about your book. I've only read a little bit of it, unfortunately. I was really hoping to have it finished, but had some revisions to do, so I wasn't able to finish it. But when I do finish it, I'm going to talk to you about it. I will definitely
Yeah,
be
no
updating
worries at
you.
all.
But yeah, I wanted to. I noticed that you have great setting in your story, just from like the what I've seen, as well as you wrote a post for Be Your Own Mentor about setting, that I thought was really helpful. So I was just wondering, like, how do you, like, when you're writing a scene, how do you kind of like inform how your setting is going to be? I know you said you kind of incorporate it with the character, but I just want to get your take quickly.
Yeah. Setting is such an interesting one. And I think because I'm such a character focused writer, that I do sometimes tend to see it as another character, or just like describing it as a character or introducing it like a person almost. But like an omnipresent sort of person, which is, I think, a pretty strange way to sort of view it. But yeah, I tend to, like in my first draft, I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to setting. Like I'll just kind of set bare things up just so then I can kind of continue writing. But then when I go back through revisions, I always like to bring out, I think first and foremost, like the feeling of what it's supposed to be like for the characters who are there. Just because I think like introducing all of those senses and whatnot is really important for the readers. They can understand what it's like to be there, not just for the character. So that's kind of my method usually when I decide to, I guess, go all in with the setting.
Yes, seeing your setting as a character, I feel like that's a really helpful thing, because it's kind of like you can infuse it through the entire story. And you've read my previous draft, so you know that like my white wall syndrome is like insane. Like I'm just like, I hate writing any setting. I'm just like,
no,
they're in a place. That's all.
done.
Like,
yeah.
but I've been really working on that for my revisions lately. I think I've improved a little bit, so that's why I just wanted to like get your take a little bit on it,
Yeah.
because I noticed just from like reading the beginning of your first chapter that you have some great stuff, and your story overall is about kind of like a neighborhood and its evolution and like trying to figure out like the future of it. So I thought that was really interesting and cool, because my setting is kind of around the Scarborough area, but I've kind of like made it into like a fictionalized version of Scarborough.
Right. Yeah.
And changed some stuff around. And I was talking to Taya about it recently, because she is also from Scarborough and like wrote this great essay for the Walrus about her experiences growing up there. And so for me, it's been like, so for those that don't know, like they're on the outskirts of Toronto, there's like different boroughs, and Scarborough is one of them. And it's typically seen as like a well publicly funded bureau of the Toronto area. And there's a lot of discrimination that comes with that. And it's something that was a little bit traumatizing as a child to deal with, because I went to, so a lot of people don't know that there's like a very well off area of Scarborough where people just like live along the lake, and it's just white people right there. And I went to like one of the schools right there. And so it was just like I was like one of two Black students at my entire school in elementary school. And with just like kids who just were like had millionaire parents. It was just a lot.
That's
So
stressful
that
for sure. Yeah.
it was yeah, it was really stressful. It
Mhm.
was like, I don't know, I'm just trying to navigate that, and I want to put that into the story, but it's also like hard to do. So I've been like looking at like Scarborough by like Catherine Hernandez and like seeing her work as well to see how she kind of has like put that setting into her narrative, because she's
Mhm.
a great writer. She's amazing. So yeah, that's all I really want to say about that. But
I
I'll
actually
throw
have a
something with like,
question for you about
yeah,
that, if that's cool.
of
Because
course.
I wonder, there's so many different experiences. I know like getting published, like not only in Canada, but then potentially also in the States, it's what I found is like the cultural differences, even if you're kind of saying like, oh, I grew up in a predominantly white area, I feel like it's not the exact same experience. I don't know if that's kind of it for you. Like if you've read fiction where it's like, here's a Black character in a predominantly white area, and you felt like, oh yeah, this is exactly what my experience was like in Canada, or has it been different for you? I don't know. I think I'm just
Yeah,
interested in the cultural differences, because I know for me, when like if I read a story that they're like, yeah, this is supposed to be like representation for me,
right.
sometimes I find that it's like very Americanized and I can't always get into it. Like I can recognize myself in it, but not completely. And so I wonder if that's something that you've kind of experienced as well. I know this is not at
Yeah,
all related. I'm just very
I know
curious
that's
as you
fine. Yeah,
mentioned
that's
it.
totally cool. Yeah, kind of to add on to that, I feel like for me, I feel like when I see stories of like Black people in particular in a predominantly white area, or the space that they're existing in media that is from the States, I pretty much relate to it on an exact level.
Okay.
It's kind of like, okay, so I would say the first major one in cinema would be like The Hate That You Give,
Mm,
and just kind of like Star's experience going to a predominantly white school, and it's kind of like people just like making these weird comments, and you have to kind of code switch and just be like, even if people say something that's like, what the fuck, you can't freak out, you just have to be like, haha, that's fine,
mm,
and
yeah.
just kind of
Fun.
like be okay with it, and because I feel like it's this thing where you can't, I feel like as a person of color, you're not really afforded the ability to get upset if people piss you off.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of reflected in the fact that, like, I think it's 41% of Black students in Toronto um, are suspended in their high school years. And I think that has a great deal to do with the fact that, like, how Black students are perceived,
Hmm.
and the fact that if someone gets angry happens to be a Black student versus a white student, Black anger isn't taken as well and could often lead to suspension compared to white students.
Right.
So I was always very conscious of that from an extremely young age. Um, I just kind of like knew that I can't really outwardly react to this. So even if I seem like a pushover, this is just kind of what I have to do.
Yeah.
Um, and it's kind of sad because I know that I was perceived like that. Even people of color later who I talked to were just like, I can't believe you didn't like push back or like say anything when people acted like that. It's like, well, you're not Black, so I guess you're not realizing I didn't want to get suspended or like
Yeah.
charged for trying to push this little blonde pigtailed girl down when she was doing some weird shit. So that
Right.
was kind of my. I feel like it's pretty similar to a lot of the experiences that I've seen and portrayed.
It's true.
So I did want to ask you, like, okay, so what first got you interested in writing? So like as a kid, like when did you first think like, oh, I want to be a writer? And what were your early influences? And then if your early influences didn't have to happen to be people of color, when did you start first getting influenced by people of color who are in the writing industry?
Um, I guess it's so interesting because I think with me, I had like I think even like it's such a boring story because I'm like, yeah, I've always just wanted to be a writer and I always kind of knew that at some point it would happen. So I think I spent a lot of time, like even in terms of early influencers, like I was growing up, like I would read like picture books and whatnot. And then I think probably common for a lot of people, like you hit an age and you're like, maybe I'm not as interested in reading as I was before, unfortunately. And then it's like this weird time where you're trying to rediscover your tastes and whatnot. But even during that time, like I guess just being like a very big nerd, like I just read a lot of fan fiction and I wrote a lot of fan fiction. And so that's kind of, that was like what I read. Like I don't, like I guess even as a kid, like I had a favorite book here and there, but I think it was just like that community writing aspect that really, that I think is probably one of my earliest influences. Like, because you get to try out different things and like techniques and like writing and all of that sort of thing when you're just writing for fun. And so I think at a point I had just been like, yeah, I'm just going to do this until I get an idea for an original story. And then I'm just going to write the original story. And that's just how I'd always had it in my head. So I never really felt like a rush to either get published or like to write something that's publishable, just because I was really just enjoying like writing stuff for fandom and whatnot. In terms of authors that made me feel seen, I think, this is gonna sound kind of weird, but like I can't think of anybody, honestly. Like even growing up, not so much. Recently, I've been really fortunate to read a lot more diversely, just because it seems like there is a bit of a shift within publishing. So it's nice to have more options, whether it's reading books by friends or reading books from authors I admire, and noticing that I kind of like relate a little bit to this character or a little bit to that character. But I can't say with certainty that I have ever kind of really felt like, oh, I really feel seen because of something someone has written. Except for, and I guess this kind of counts because she is a writer as well as like an actor and a producer, but Issa Rae, who first had her web series, The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, I first watched when like I was in university, and that was the first time, and I'm honestly probably sure the only time since, that I felt like, oh, this character is me, or I feel very close to that character, or I can like see my experiences in her and whatnot. So yeah, I think probably that's, yeah, just The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl. I think that Issa Rae, honestly, like I don't even know if she knows like how pivotal that was for me personally, and then I guess a lot of people as well. So
I'm sure like everyone she talks to, like she gets a lot of people, like Black girls who are just like, I didn't see me as like a blurred anywhere around,
yeah,
like a Black
like
nerd type of thing.
Exactly, right? Like a very specific Black female experience, or like a very specific Black experience. And I had never seen that anywhere. And like, even when I was in middle school growing up, like I've like, I don't know, like I've just never been the cool one ever. And so I always felt like very out of place and like not a part of the Black experience, because I wasn't like cool and I wasn't like this or like that, or like whatever the representation I had seen had told me I should be. And that was kind of the first time where I was like, oh, it's okay if I'm like a bit awkward or a bit like whatever, because like there's a place for people like me, right, who exists. So it was cool.
I love that. And I feel like I've seen a couple articles recently where it's kind of talked about like coolness isn't as accessible for Black women as it is for Black men, in certain circumstances, just because I feel like they're, especially in predominantly white spaces, it's kind of like a lot of people perceive Blackness as like, oh, this is like a cool thing that we can kind of assimilate into our culture or appropriate. And it isn't something that is easy for Black women to be able to kind of like get into that space, but it is easier for some Black men to get into that space. So I feel like I'm just only mentioning that because of the fact that it's just like, I feel like I've had some experiences with this. Like, I feel like when I was younger, was like, there's a lot of people who like really don't like me. I don't know why, but it's like, oh, it was anti-Black racism. Now.
It was anti-Blackness all along. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't Agnes. It wasn't Agatha. It was
anti-Black race. Yeah, exactly. I know, it's honestly so weird to look back at those experiences and I'm like, oh, they were just racist. Like that's what it was. Like, but it's so screwed up, because like now like my self-esteem was affected like adolescent growing up because of, I don't know, some bullshit. Yeah, this is a tangent, but yeah.
No, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that. But okay, getting back to like your fan fiction thing. So what kind of fan fiction did you used to write?
Oh my God. So I used to write a lot of Digimon because I was obsessed with it. I wrote season 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I feel like I was such a huge loser because I would only, like, I had never finished season 3, Tamers. I've never finished season 4, Frontier. but I watched enough just so I could understand the characters enough so I could write fan fiction. So like that's
awesome.
that is the type of child I was. Like I just was like, oh, I just want to write stuff. And then at a point I was writing things for like Gundam Wing because I really loved Gundam Wing as well. Yeah. Perhaps I can't even remember. I had so many different accounts. I don't know. Like I had different accounts for different fandoms. So I'm just trying to remember. Like I might have also written something for like Inuyasha or whatever. And like
fun.
Just like all over the place. Like I was really just like I just loved like character and stuff and just wanted to like write different characters from different shows. And that was kind of my thing for like a very long time actually.
I love that. That's really fun. Like Digimon, I was a fan of it. Like the first season was the main one that I watched. Yeah. And I was just like, I just loved Matt with his little like sleeveless green turtleneck.
Okay.
I don't know what's wrong with me. I was just like, yes, little sarcastic, rude ass Matt.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I like couldn't stand, not that I couldn't stand him, but like Ty was my favorite. And so I was like, if you're mad at him, you're mad at me. Like I was just such a very like passionate child about like, no one is allowed to be like, if you're mean to him, then like I'm taking that personally. And it was a very strange like bonding, imprinting thing, me and this like fictional character, but whatever. It is what it is.
Ty was really cool. Like I was like, yeah, he's awesome. But I don't know why I was just like, Matt's so cute. And it's like, no, like I don't know what was wrong. But yeah, so that's really cool. You had like a lot of like just really interesting, like Inuyasha, that's also great fan fiction too. I was actually I did an interview with Brittany Lewis a couple weeks ago, and I was asking her the same question, and she was talking about like she's really into Twilight when she was younger, and she like was into Twilight fan fiction and stuff like that. And I was talking to her, I was telling her about like my Animorph fan fiction stuff that I
that's insane. I love that so much.
Okay. You know what Animorphs is, because I had to explain the whole thing, and every time I have to explain Animorphs, I seem insane.
Oh my God, because it's crazy. Because when you describe it, it's like they're kids and they turn into like a starfish or like whatever, and it's like it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah,
but like
it sounds really dumb.
Yeah. Oh my God, I remember Animorphs in that TV show. Oh my gosh, yeah, and like the books and everything. That's crazy.
Yeah, like in terms of like representation and like feeling like I was seeing, like they did have that character Cassie, who was like a Black girl character, and she had like each character had like different books based on them, and like she had her books, and kind of seeing her books and seeing her on the cover of those books in the 90s really made a difference for me, even though their covers were crazy because they were just kind of like slowly turning people into animals.
I know.
It was
like MS Paint level, like I know.
Exactly. It was like MS Paint. Just like, what is this? And I'm terrified. I'll have nightmares. But just kind of like seeing like a Black girl on the cover, and then I feel like the way that she was represented as a Black girl was great. I feel like Catherine Applegate, she is white, but I felt like the way that she represented Cassie was realistic and it wasn't stereotypical. I was really happy with her representation of Cassie. Did you read any Animorphs books, or not really?
I didn't. No, I only really, because in the Animorphs show, and I'm gonna mess up his name, but he played some character. There was a twin. There's two of them. One of them was in the Animorphs show. The other one was an X-Men.
It was like literally my first crush, Shawn Ashmore.
That's it. He went to my middle school, apparently. Like, at my middle school, I know, because at my middle school, we had a thing, and they're like, this guy's an Animorphs. And I'm like, that guy. But like, I never spoken to him or whatever. And so when I would watch the show, I'd be like, that guy went to the same middle school as me. But like, that was the one connection I had.
Oh, really?
Shawn Ashmore, and then his brother. Like, one was an X-Men, one was... That was it. Okay.
He was in Smallville.
Ah, okay. Yeah, very weird.
Hilarious. No, honestly, like, I loved Animorphs, and then when I found out there was a TV show, I was excited. And then as soon as I saw Shawn Ashmore, I'm just like, okay, I guess I'm straight. But I wasn't.
I guess I'm invested in this. It's like, yep.
Yeah, I don't know what. And then like X-Men, because he was Iceman and X-Men, and then I love X-Men. I don't know about you. Like, I actually wrote like a fantasy series kind of like X-Men inspired when I was in high school. It was kind of like, X-Men is kind of like the evolution of humans. So it's like the near future, they evolve into
Yeah.
X-Men. I kind of had like an ancient X-Men thing. So it's just like their underground organization of like of super evolved humans that's been like hiding for centuries. So
Oh,
that
that's
type
pretty
of
sick.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I was writing in high school. And then that's how I first got into writing after I wrote my and more fan fiction.
That's how I
Yeah.
appreciate that a lot, because I think a lot of writers are probably the same. Like, I think the first time I was ever asked a question about fan fiction, like I just immediately started sweating, and I'm like, oh my god, they're gonna know I'm a loser. Like, this is horrible. But then I realized like there's a lot of us out there who like are like we're writing fan fiction, are continuing to write, like whatever, because it's just like it's fun. Like, I don't know. There's no other way to describe it. Like sometimes you just don't want any responsibility and you just want to write something for fun. So
Exactly. Nice. Like I feel like people poo-poo fan fiction a lot. Like there was a conversation recently on Twitter about fan fiction, and someone who was like very adamantly against it, and everyone else was just kind of like, no, that's kind of what helped me get into writing and inspired me to just write my own material. And I have to admit, like when you're writing fan fiction, there's also like the aspect of like if you're people who are just like putting their own characters that maybe don't have a personality into a set world.
Mm-hmm.
Writing like that is fine for fan fiction, but it can also kind of like hinder your voice if you're trying to write an original piece that isn't. I know there's this thing of like when you're writing, people can kind of be like, your main character just seems like they're kind of blank, and that can sometimes be a result of just like inputting a character from like a fan fiction type of style into a story. I feel like I've noticed that.
That is true. I think that because I think that's a really interesting thing as well, though, because I think when you're writing fan fiction, I don't know obviously how other people had kind of viewed it, but I always thought it was cool to take a character who already existed and then try and write them, right? Like try and like continue like how did I interpret their character and like all of those sorts of things. So in a way, it's like I wouldn't say like building upon their character, but just kind of like trying to keep it consistent. And I think that that requires like a certain level of maybe like whether it's like awareness or just skill or just like whatever, but it is something that I think that you can develop and you can build on. And so it's interesting that I don't know. I definitely do think there's a correlation though. It's people who did enjoy writing fanfics and then now they're writing original fiction and they're able to kind of bring out characters in that way because they've had the experience of like, here's a character who already exists. You cannot make up this person's character. You have to try and match it, right? I think it's different, but yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's an interesting thing because like some people are into that. I feel like a lot of people are, but some people just start writing original fiction, but it can be a different process for sure. But I did want to ask you, okay, so you were writing your like Digimon fan fiction stuff, and then when did you kind of like move it transition into writing your own fiction, and what was that kind of about? And then when did you first kind of realize, okay, I want to get into traditional publishing, and then get into that process?
Yeah. So I remember as like, I think it was either the summer or the fall of like 2012. And I only remember this because I was like in between jobs. Like I had graduated again. And then I was like, I finished the internship. I was waiting to get a full-time job. And I was like, well, now that I have some time, let me try and write something original. And so that was the first manuscript I wrote, was kind of between those months, between like, I want to say like August and November of that year. And it was weird because I didn't know what to do with it after, but then like everyone's like, well, just revise it, just edit it. And so I went through and I was like, yeah, this is weird, cut that, change that, whatever, but not a very deep revision at all. And then I just started querying because I was like, I guess this is the next step, whatever. And I learned very quickly that I was not the best at revising and editing. Like I didn't really know what it entailed or like what it looks like. So I would write a book, I would edit it, and then I would query it. Then I would get rejected and I'm like, okay, next story. And like, I did that for like, I want to say 3 or 4 years. Like I was just writing something new, editing it, and then querying it, getting rejected, starting again. And so Like Home is actually, I want to say it's my like 5th manuscript from like that same sort of like conveyor belt process. So, and that one I think in particular was different because I applied to author mentor match with that one. And then I was paired with a mentor, and I was really able to learn about what revising looks like, and really sort of not be so, I don't know, I like, I want to say like not be so precious about my work and like what
Yeah.
it's supposed to be and whatnot. Because it was very much like change this, it's not working, or like what if we bring out this more, or what about this and what about that. And so it really kind of taught me to sort of separate myself from the work, which is a difficult process anyway. Like I
Yeah.
by no means like I'm still struggling with that. I think it's like you write something new and you're like, wow, I love this so much, and then like you have to at some point detach, but it's like, when do you detach and what do you do and all that sort of thing. Yeah, but that's kind of like how my writing history, I guess, up to this point. Like it was just a lot of trial and error, writing stuff, failing, and then continuing, sort of.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, because like author mentor match and like stuff like pitch wars and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the value of having a mentor is really incredible.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of like have someone with more experience kind of like give you a take on like what you're writing is like and how to improve, because
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to do on your own. It really is. And so
Yeah.
it's like I first started querying around Pit Mad last year and like doing pitch wars, and I had you as my mentor before that.
Yeah.
So that was great, because I was just like really excited to like have someone who had gone through this process before me, and you'd gone through like author mentor match as well. Kind of like just kind of like guide me on like what that is, because yeah, like you said, like you were kind of like, you said you were like revising and editing before you got into author mentor match, but you were just kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I like, it's hard to do on your own. So like trying to figure out like
Yeah.
all those different like steps of it, and there's just like the craft of revising and like how many different things are incorporated with that is like incredibly like, even if you think like you're an expert on writing before you get into like trying to query, it's just like it's hard to know everything. It's a lot of things to consider
Yeah.
at once while you're writing. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely a lot. So stuff like be your own mentor, I feel like has been a huge help, because it's like if you want to get your manuscript to a place where you are ready to query and you don't have a mentor, you really have to like sometimes like put that work in yourself, and it's kind of like maybe you don't know where to start. So stuff like be your own mentor, which you wrote for the setting thing, like that can be really helpful, because it's like being your own mentor is like has to be a valuable thing, because it's like there's only so many spots in any author mentorship program, and
Exactly.
most
Yeah.
people don't get them. And trying to figure out like, okay, well, if I didn't get that, how am I going to revise to a place where I feel ready to query?
Mm-hmm.
It can be difficult for sure.
It is, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of like something that I've been considering lately, because like when I was talking to you about like my project when I like first started, before I started querying, it's just like I knew nothing about anything. I was just like, yeah, I think I'm revising, I think I'm editing, but I'm just like doing some minor stuff. I'm just like,
Yeah.
no, that wasn't what I should have been doing. I needed to like do a lot more work personally, just like on my scene construction,
Mm-hmm.
that I had no idea that I need to work on.
Yeah.
And it was something that I feel like I've just like slowly learned throughout this process. And I feel like everyone on this process is going to be like, okay, well, there's things I didn't know that I just kind of had to like learn along the way. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was kind of the main thing. But
Yeah.
I I don't know. I'm trying my best to kind of just like be like, okay, like trying to be impartial about this. It's just like here, if I get feedback, that's fine. I don't need to like take it personally, and that's about it. But
Mm-hmm. It's hard though. It's so hard. And I feel like it's one of those things that like does not get easier. Like I had like oh, like even recently, I'm like I always like I read feedback and I'm like, oh, this is great. Sure, like yeah, I can do this. And then like the technical side of the rational side, I guess, of my brain starts kicking in. Is like, yeah, you can just move this, take this, whatever, cut that out. It's not that important. Like all those sorts of steps. but then like the emotional side of my mind is like, oh, but I love this. Like, this is me.
Yes,
Like, I put this in because it symbolizes that, and like all this kind of stuff. And it's literally like this the entire time. So it's hard. Like, it doesn't get easier, and I hate it. Like, it's not.
Yeah. I feel like, okay, so I'm a Taurus, and I feel like people always say, oh, Tauruses, you're a bull, so you're stubborn. And I was just like, I'm not stubborn. Like, what are you talking about? But then I realized when it comes to my writing, it's just like, I feel like my attitude, like, I don't actually say this, but I'll be like, hey, can I get feedback on this? Someone will give me feedback, and then I'm just like, no, F you, no, I did
You're
not
like, thank
like
you,
that.
but no, like, you're
No.
wrong.
Exactly. Like, no, that was not correct.
That was not the
that's
correct
literally-
feedback. So we're just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm glad I recognize that about myself, because it's kind of like I was being like you said, precious about my work. And it's like, but I have this thing, I don't want to take it out. And it was like really symbolic and like it works. But now I've just kind of realized, like, I feel like in the back of my mind, I'm just like, I know this is shitty, but I like it. That's
right.
Which
Or
is a
like, oh,
weird
I'm
thing
good.
to
Like, I feel like I get in so much trouble, or like, I don't know, like because every time I write stuff, I'm very much like a feelings oriented person. So like my sun sign is Cancer, so I'm just like always crying. And then my moon sign and my rising sign, they're both air signs. So I'm just like all like this all the time. And then every time someone's like, well, why don't we try and ground this or do that? I'm like, no, like, this is about the feeling. It's about like the emotional journey. And that's the only thing, like, I always write everything as like an emotional journey first, and then stuff happens secondary. But like, it's hard to try and flip it, because I recognize, even like, especially in the YA space, there's not a lot of room for that sort of like, everything is feelings only sort of stuff, because it's not concrete, and like no one's going to buy a story like that. But yeah, it's hard. It is really hard to try and adapt.
Yeah, so I feel like the thing that's kind of saved me is just like, hey, like, I can read this later, this shitty version, so that's fine. Like, I don't need to refresh for this. Like, just save it and do something that will improve your story, so that it might like be more traditionally like marketable. Like,
right, it's like the compromise. It's always trying to find the compromise is important.
Because I feel like before that I was just like, no, I can't change it. It was like, you can literally change it to anything and it will still, the old version will be there. Like, so that really helped me get to a point where I was just not like, I'm not changing.
Right. One thing that honestly helped me a lot, like, I guess going back to the whole fan fiction aspects, is like viewing it as writing fan fiction, like you're improving or you're changing or you're like whatever with the source material. So it's like the version you write, you're like, oh yeah, this is the version, and someone's like, why not change this, or what about this? And then you start to kind of tweak things as if you're like writing a different version of the source material. And so I like just conceptualizing it that way kind of helped me a lot at first, because then it made me really feel like, oh, I can change everything. Like, I don't actually have to keep this. Like, if I wanted to write an AU fic, like an alternate universe story, like I definitely could, of my own work sort of thing. And just like trying to, like, once again, like the process of trying to detach and whatnot.
Exactly. It's like we can write a million versions of like a scene, and like we can keep all those versions, so we can read all of them. It's just like kind of dependent on how is this going to improve my story, so that like it will be to the point where I need it to be like publishable. Like, that's kind of like the way that I think of it now. But it was hard to get to that point. But okay, so I did want to move along a little bit. So I did actually watch I listened to your podcast, The Right Type. But that was a while ago. It was like probably 6 months ago. And you talked a little bit about how you got your agent, but I did want to hear a little bit about your experience about like querying, and any advice or tips that you have for writers of color, and when you were making your decision, how you decided like, okay, this is the person for me.
So querying was weird. It was one of those things that I don't know, I can't remember very well, but I don't know if I ever really let a lot of the rejections get to me, because I feel like just like at the back of my mind, I'm like, well, eventually if I keep going, this will happen. So I just have to like continue, try and improve, and all of those sorts of things. But I was querying, I want to say, for maybe like 6-ish months or something, 6 or 7 months, something like that. And I had I did not have like a method. Like I think a lot of people are like they do batches or things like that. And I was like, I'm just gonna like every time I heard of a new agent, I like researched them and I was like, yeah, I'll just send them a query. And then it was just very disorganized and whatnot. And so I queried my agent, the agent I signed with. I want to say like it was, I can't remember the month, but it was like a Monday sort of situation. And she reads pretty fast. So she got back to me fairly quickly. And then after that, I believe I sent like nudges to a few other agents. Then I was able to get, I think, 2 more offers. So it was pretty nerve-wracking having to decide. And I think that that's one thing that I was like not prepared for, to try and choose between a bunch of different agents who I thought could best represent me. So that was hard. I don't know if I have any tips for that. I think my general tip for that, and then even for querying authors of color, is always just to make sure that you're not compromising the integrity of your work to try and like match somebody else's vision regardless, because at every opportunity, if you're kind of aligned with where you're supposed to go, you will continue to find opportunities. So it's not about that. It's really about trying to make sure that you're not sacrificing too much of yourself or your work or anything for what somebody else thinks it could be. Like, I know I've heard a lot of stories about a lot of Black authors and other authors of color who they're maybe talking to an agent or an editor, and the agent or editor has like an idea of like, oh, you're Black, so your story is like this, or oh, you're this, your story is like that. And then they kind of like go along with it. Because of course you're in a position where you sort of maybe might feel like, oh, that person definitely knows what they're talking about, so I'm just going to do whatever they say, which is a difficult thing to navigate, right? It is hard because you're like in this position, you're like, I might be traditionally published and I don't want to rock the boat sort of thing. But really at the end of the day, like, it's your name that's going on the cover. So you really have to make sure that whatever's inside, like that's still your story, that's something that you're proud of or that you're like happy with and whatnot. So just in general, like really making sure that you don't compromise yourself for anybody.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I feel like yeah, being able to like kind of like when you have that point where it's like, okay, I need to kind of like see which agent is going to be able to advocate for me as a person of color the way that I need to. And as a Black person, it's very specific because there are in publishing, there is racism. What I think it's like 5 or 6% of Black people get published in traditional publishing at this point in time.
Yeah.
So that's a choice of the publishing industry. It's not like there's a lack of Black authors out there ever. It's just who gets chosen. So I recently was like watching an interview with someone who kind of mentioned the fact that like they, as an author, they wanted to only send their manuscript out to agents of color at publishers. Mm-hmm. And they were talking to a prospective agent about that before they signed with them. Mm-hmm. And I had never even heard of someone doing like something like that before, because it's kind of like there aren't that many, agents of color in general, less than authors of color in the industry. So being able to like talk to people, like the agents that you're considering about stuff like that, I feel like asking the questions that are really uncomfortable. I feel like that's something that I'm trying to consider. It's just like, hey, so like, what if I get like a translation deal in like an Asian country where they don't typically put Black people on the cover of their books, and we have a Black person on the cover of our book? How are you going to navigate that? Like stuff like that, like maybe stuff that isn't the funnest to talk about, but I feel like from what I've seen, like if they are able to kind of like talk about it and it's even uncomfortable and they just kind of like give you a good feeling and you're just like, okay, I think they're going to try and advocate for me. That's what I'm trying to think will kind of help me, but it's hard to kind of know, but that's what I'm just imagining in my head will be helpful.
Yeah, so, definitely.
Yeah. So, I did want to talk to you a little bit about once you did get signed, your editing process with your agent, and then your sub journey. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So after I got signed, we did like, I think 2 or 3 rounds of revisions
Okay.
over the span of like a few months. So I can't really remember the amount of rounds, but it was really very much like developmental and then downwards. And then we did 2 rounds of submission. So the first round, I'm trying to remember, like it was a lot of people reading, but ultimately like no one actually bought it, sort of thing. But they all gave, the ones who kind of gave feedback sort of said the same thing. And so then we went back and did revisions over the holidays with kind of like the feedback that they've been given. And then the second round was like early, I can't remember the year, but it was like early the next year after the holidays. And that was just about like a month. So I sold Canadian rights first, and then it was like US World afterwards. And then in total, it was just about a month for the second round. I don't know if that answers your question or if I like missed something.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so for the first 2 or 3 rounds that you did with your agent, what was the things that you were focusing on in your revision, like the different craft elements?
Mainly it was pacing, because I think that I personally just kind of have an issue with like the middle of the story. I think I'm like quite good at opening a story and then like closing it, like just the very end with like something very dramatic and like whatever. But the middle, I always really struggled with, just because I feel like even when I think of a story in my head, I'm like, yeah, you set it up, you introduce the characters, stuff happens. And then like the very ending scene, I want them to look like this and they're doing this or whatever. Yeah. And so it was just difficult for me to try and wrap my head around the structure. I don't have much of a, like, I'm not an outliner. I'm not really a planner. I'm not really like that in my normal life anyway. So it's hard to kind of do that for writing. So it was very much like, understandably, I would have pacing issues, but it was very much a struggle to try and wrap my head around like, okay, if this thing happens, there needs to be follow-up, or like this could happen, or I need to make sure I circle back to like these other elements I'm introducing. So it was a lot of that for like the first few rounds. And then, yeah, mostly pacing. And then I want to say like the structure of the last act was sort of punched up a little bit more, just so it felt like the climax meant something to the story. So it was mainly those 2 elements that I kind of worked on.
Okay, cool. That's really interesting, because like pacing, that's something I'm trying to like really work on right now. I feel like I've been like reading a lot of craft books, and like kind of like I feel like getting pacing down to a scene level is really helpful for me. I've been kind of like reading a lot of books on like scene development, and kind of like figuring out like, okay, so if you want to like slow a scene down for a certain part, you have to kind of like expand and really like get into the details of it. And then if you, for a certain part of the scene where you want to like close it up, you just do like shorter sentences, and then that's how you kind of like close it up. Right. How do you think about pacing on a scene level?
Pacing on like a scene level. Ooh. Sometimes actually I do think it's easier to break it down that way. Or at least by like a chapter by chapter level, just so it's easier to digest. Like usually after I write my very first draft, that's when I go in and I'll like write a summary or write like a breakdown of what happens. And so I usually have like a chapter by chapter thing where I'll be like, in chapter 1, this happens, she meets this person, whatever. And then chapter 2, this happens, whatever. And it's easier for me to keep track of that way, because I can at least physically see in that sort of an outline, like, oh yeah, she met this person in chapter 5, and then we never see that person again until like chapter 15. So maybe like, is there somewhere I can bring them back in? Can I move one of these discussions up or something like that? But I think, yeah, I don't know how many other people do that sort of pacing work, but I think on a scene by scene or like chapter by chapter level, it makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Okay. And then one last thing I want to ask you about your editorial process is, once you did those revisions with your agent and then you're sending stuff out, and then you got edits back from publishers, what kind of like edits did they have for you?
Oddly enough, it was like pretty much the same, which is what I think is so interesting about the publishing process, is like, it's because everything is so subjective. And I know that that's like, even when I was querying and people would say that, like, you know, it really just depends on what somebody likes. I was like, oh, that's kind of annoying, because like, you can't cater to that. And I think that's probably what it is. Like, you shouldn't cater to somebody else's taste anyway. But like, we had revised it. And then even when, after we'd sold it, a lot of the revisions were like, oh, the pacing in the middle and the climax and the ending. So it was like the same sort of thing. But I thought that was still pretty cool because it was like, I don't know, it was nice for me, like my very first book, to know that like, okay, everybody who I'm working with, they kind of have the same idea of what they want the story to look like, and like what they're seeing are sort of like the weaker areas. So to me, it was like, it was strange just because I was like, oh, we kind of already went over all this stuff, but it was also pretty cool because it's like, we're all seeing the same thing. And
That's awesome. Yeah. It's good to hear stuff like that, because I'm, for me, like, kind of like getting to that point, it's like trying to figure out like, okay, what are people going to want me to kind of change in terms of my story? If I'm like during that, like getting an agent, what is your agent going to want you to revise, and what a publisher is going to want you to revise? Hopefully other people are interested in that as well.
yeah.
Okay, so I do have two final questions for you.
Sure.
First one, what advice would you give to yourself as a young writer when you're just starting out?
How young are we talking about? Like a elementary school? Because I feel like a lot of writers are like younger than I am, so I don't know.
I mean, just like when you're starting on your traditional publishing
when I was
process.
starting out. Oh, okay. I think I probably would tell myself when I was like in high school, because I think that was probably when I was the most impressionable, is just to like, don't ask anybody anything about what you want to do and just go and do it. Because I feel like I personally wasted like a lot of time just like listening to other people. Like I just was like, oh, it seems like more people are doing this. And like I went through a really weird time when I was at the end of high school as well. Like just feeling very, very dramatic, because that's just how I am. But feeling like, oh, I don't know what my future looks like. I can't even conceptualize it. And so just really not trying to look externally for like, for what it is that I feel like I know I'm supposed to be doing, and then just kind of focus on that and go and write something. And like, yeah.
That's awesome. I love that, because yeah, especially like when you're in high school and trying to figure out, like, it's a lot of pressure. It's like you're in grade 12, you have to like, you're like, okay, what are you gonna do for the rest of your life? It's like,
yeah,
what the hell?
I know. And I was just like, but the joke is like, ever since I was young, I was like, I'm gonna be a writer. But it's like, I don't know, the environment that I'm in, society or whatever, had told me like, you can't do that. Like,
Exactly.
it's hard for you. You're going to be poor forever. It's not lucrative. It's this, it's that. It's not stable. Like all these sorts of things. And like, I genuinely wish I didn't listen to them, because like I recognize that people say things out of the goodness of their heart because they're like afraid, they don't want you to kind of be in a bad position.
Right.
But like, I don't know. I'm not very honestly good at anything else. Like, at all. So I really should have just like kept that in my mind and been like, this is actually the only thing that I'm semi decent at. Like, let's just see how far I can go with this, and like, whatever, like you can always start again. And I think that's probably another thing I would tell my my younger self, which is a really cool message that I learned from this Japanese drama. But like, you can always start again. Like, there's no reason why you graduate high school and it's like, oh, I'm studying this, so I have to be this forever. Life is very long. Like, you can do something else, right? So
exactly. Yeah, I love that, because I feel like a lot of people are just thinking like, okay, well, whatever I choose in high school, like that's forever. It's like, no, people start second, third, fourth careers at any point in their lives. So
I know.
Yeah, it's kind of like being open to like what works, and like, yeah, I love that advice of just like not listening to others. It's like following your passion. It's like, if you're not passionate about something, how are you going to do it for a long period of time? So
yeah. And you know, that's honestly what I had found when I'd started working in like various jobs, is like, it was such a, like, it's always such a sobering moment when I get somewhere, I'm like in a team meeting or whatever, and then all of a sudden I hear people talking about like my job, their job, like whatever, and they're talking with such passion. And I'm kind of looking at them and I'm like, oh, you guys genuinely like this. Like, you genuinely enjoy this, and I don't. And then it, like, that's happened to me almost in every job I've had, where I'm like, oh, these people are serious. Like, they really enjoy doing this. I'm like, oh, I have to get out. They're going to know that I'm like being fake or whatever. Because I always thought that like, it doesn't matter if you like what you're doing, like whatever. But I'm just like, no, I do not believe that to be true. I think you can be passionate about where you are in life, and you don't have to accept that you just have to like do a job and be miserable or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I think that's an especially important lesson for immigrant parents or children of immigrants.
Yes.
Because I feel like there's a lot of immigrant parents who are just like, you need to have this job. If you don't, no.
Yeah. My parents for the longest time, they're like, get a job in the government. I'm like, doing what? Right. Like, I don't want to work for the government. They're like, if you get a job in the government, like, you'll be safe, like it'll be fine. And I'm like, okay, but doing what? Like, why? It's like it's so
Yeah.
narrow, right? Like do this, do that, and then that's it. And everything else is just like you're suffering. So
Yeah. But I understand, like, it's hard to break out of that, especially if you have strict parents, but it's just like, at
yeah,
the end of the day, you do have to consider like what's going to work for you and what you can do for the long term that's going to make you happy. So yeah.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
I appreciate that advice. Okay, so final question. What's something great that you read recently that you want other people to hear about?
Ooh. Oh my God. I have to like look at my bookshelf. I've been horrible because I've been like starting books and not finishing anything because I like was writing and revising and all that stuff. So I haven't finished it yet because I'm being very slow, but The Project by Courtney Summers
Oh
is
yeah.
so creepy. Like I was reading it and I'm like, I very easily could be in this position. Like I don't know, you read it and you're like, yeah, I can see how people would join a cult or how this could happen. Like it's all very, and for that reason, I think it's really creepy because I'm like, oh, this is real life. Like this could very easily happen to someone. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been reading the most recently.
Amazing. I love that you suggested that because like Courtney is like I'm I'm like her number one fan. It's like a problem. Like I first read have you read her first book, Cracked Up to Date?
I haven't yet, but I want to because I know didn't they do like a reissue or something or like a
Yes,
new
yeah,
cover story
like
situation? Yeah,
last
so I wanted to
year.
buy it because it matched the Sadie one.
Yeah, so I bought that when it first came out when I was 16. So it's just that perfect age where I had already started writing my original fiction that was like kind of like very dark like hers. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to write. And then I like
Yeah.
literally got all my friends to read her first book. I was just like, this is amazing. And then I I worked at Indigo for a while, and when I first started working there, she was supposed to do like a tour at my store, but she happened to not come to that stop, and then I was devastated.
Oh,
And then I didn't meet her for like 5 years later, and I met her for like her Sadie tour, and like Sadie destroyed my entire life. It was just a lot. Have you read Sadie?
it was. That's actually the first book I read by her. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I remember after I read it, at first I was like, oh, that was a really good read. I like closed it, put it away. And then like a month later, I'm like, what happened to her? Like I just kept being like,
yeah, that was
what
so
happened?
funny.
I'm like, I guess this could have happened, but this could have also happened. And I like kept thinking about that book for like half a year. And I was like, oh, that's a really good story. Like it's like it took a while to like settle in where I was like, oh man, like Jesus. Like I just like really started to like it just
It's a
continued
lot.
to
Yeah.
ruin my life over the course of like 6 months. I was just like, and then the podcast thing, the special they did as well, I thought was
Yes,
really
it was
a
so
really
good.
cool
The
tie-in.
girls
Like
one.
I think I love like cross media tie-ins and stuff with books. I think that was so cool.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. And it was like when I met her, it was kind of just like this crazy thing of just like, I've been trying to meet you for like 5 years. And like, I just trying to express to her, like, she loves Supernatural. So I like got her a Supernatural book. And then like, I wrote her like this long letter.
Oh my
And she was so
God.
sweet.
So
Yeah, she was really awesome. But yeah, the project, I'm just pacing myself right now because it's just like after Sadie, I was just like I actually sent her this meme of like it was like just like a cartoon someone drew of just like two types of authors. First type of author is just like, I'm gonna take my readers on a magical journey. And then the next one is just
yeah.
like, I will destroy you. That was it. And I was like, this is
That's
you, Courtney. And
accurate.
she's like, yeah. She was like, yep, that's me. I thought
I
that was
appreciate that. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so accurate though. Cause I'm like, and that's, I think I tend to, I love and I gravitate towards to like books where the author really, like they know how to use the different elements. So whether it's like character or whatever, to really like push a feeling or like push that sort of emotion and just like make you feel like, oh, I'm very uncomfortable or like, oh, I'm very terrified or just like whatever it is. Because I do really think that like, or maybe it's just me, whatever, but like that the emotional charge in a story is kind of what drives it. Like that's kind of what makes someone after they put something down, they're like, oh, that's going to stay with me for a while because you made them feel something. And so I think that that's really important. And she's like very good at that. And it's terrifying, but I love it so
amazing.
much.
Okay, so we're gonna end off now. I just wanted to see if you want to talk a little bit about what you have coming up soon.
Yeah. So I am in revisions for my second book, which is coming out like this time next year, probably with Fowle and Friends in the US and then with HarperCollins Canada in Canada. And it's a really fun story. It is it's one of those things where it's like I wrote it during Nano, like last year or 2 years ago or something. I wrote it very quickly. It was very sort of like excavating all of this stuff from my chest. But it's like a pretty funny story. It's about identity and culture and this Nigerian Canadian girl and trying to figure out what her happiness looks like when she's kind of caught in between being very Nigerian, but also being very like westernized, very Canadian, American, whatever. So it was difficult to write for that reason, because I was like, this is very much the experience of myself and so many people like me. But it was also a lot of fun to write because there's like a huge wedding scene and there's a lot of like pidgin English and like stuff like that. So I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm really excited to share it with people next year.
That sounds amazing. So if anyone's interested in adding it on Goodreads, it's called Model Minority. Is that right?
Yes.
And it's kind of pitches like crazy rich Asians wedding thing with like mixed with Nigerian wedding culture.
Yes.
Is that right?
If you've ever watched on Netflix, the Wedding Party, it's a Nigerian movie. That to me, that's kind of like, like I watched that movie and I'm like, oh, this is kind of what I was thinking, because there's like rich people and lots of unnecessary, like just unnecessary things happening at the wedding and whatnot, but it's a lot of fun. And yeah, if you were interested, I think like I have my links and everything available, so you can definitely add that on Goodreads.
Okay, perfect. And I will have that attached to this video as well as the rest of Louisa's links. And Louisa, I just want to thank you again. This was amazing. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So thank you again.
No problem. And, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Have a good one. Bye.
Okay. You too. Bye.